Hello, my friend. Oh, you might be on mute.
Yes, I am on mute.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Hi, Misa.
Hi, Misa. How are you?
Good. How's it? Oh, you guys just said you were good. But good to see you again.
So I have the other ones coming on here soon. So thank you guys for doing this. I know it's a Wednesday night, and I'm sure you all have better things that you can be doing. So thank you.
My daughter was just teasing me. She's like, Mom, it's starting to feel like Hong Kong because like Monday night we had something, tonight we have something, tomorrow night I have something. And she's like, in Hong Kong, you worked like from first thing in the morning to late at night. I'm like, okay, it's just a weird week.
I got on that one. Oh, it's just a weird year. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
There's Julie.
Agreed.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie. Oh, I love your necklace.
You're on mute, Julie.
That's a good start, right?
So, and Alex will be joining us soon. Julie, I saw the emails that you had sent, and my apologies. I was out walking and then had dinner. Great on the diversity thing, and I'm fine with that. And we'll wing it on the repetition.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Who had it? And I know I talk about virtual fairs. I'm just touching on it. I think Alex is going to get into it more.
In recruitment and a bit about the future, or as much of it as we can imagine. So thanks for coming and good to meet you all.
And I'll go next. And I'm Laura Light with International School Services. I've been with ISS for 13 years now, so a while, and I know quite a few of you on this presentation. So good to see many of you. Unfortunately, our paths are not going to cross in person this year, but as you know, I'm the Director of Global Recruitment here with International School Services. And before that, I was a teacher and educator around the world, in many parts of the world. One of my most favorite places would be your region, the EARCOS region. Spent 7 years out in Southeast Asia. So honored to be here with you and representing ISS. ISS has an online system called ISS Scroll Advantage. And ISS is working with hundreds of schools and thousands of teachers. So we're really pleased to be here and be able to answer your questions and work with you and go through this interesting scenario that we are all have been thrown into. So, and I want to thank Ed for giving us the opportunity. So, and Julie, I'll throw it over to you.
Thank you. My name is Julie Ryan. I'm one of the 23 or so search associates. You, I'm sure, all know the company. We've been in business about 30 years. I have spent about 24 years of my adult life abroad in international schools, and then here in the States, mostly in California, as an elementary school principal on the Stanford campus, and then at the American School in London most recently, where, like a lot of people you know, went abroad for 2 or 3 years and stayed for 19. So that was my second entree to international schools. I was a trainer for the Principals Training Center for the last 20 years, something I've really enjoyed a lot and have met a lot of you there. I saw the name scrolling across. Search is really busy right now. I think we're trying to support a lot of teachers who lost jobs at the last minute during the pandemic, or who found it impossible to get where they were going and finally decided that for the good of their family or their personal situation, they needed to stay wherever they were. So that's been very interesting, supporting people. And I think we're all wondering what recruitment this year is going to look like. I'm often asked, what's it going to look like? I'm like, well, the crystal ball's a little dusty. You know, we're trying to see what is coming at us. So we hope we can share some things today that will, you know, help a lot of you at least ask good questions as you think about what your school's going to be doing in this next 12 or 15 months.
Before we get started, Ed was just able to join us, so I want to turn it over to Ed real quick. Ed, are you available to talk?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sorry. Yeah, my internet just totally crashed just as we started. So I was finally able to weave my way back. I just wanted to thank everybody for showing up. This is a big challenge every year, the whole issue of recruitment, and it continues to be so, even more so now with the world we're living in. So I was really happy that Alex and Laura and Julie offered to put this together for us. And I just want to thank them very, very much in support of all of us in EARCOS for taking time, Alex in the middle of the night, no less, to join us. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing about the issues and possible solutions for the interesting year ahead. Thanks very much, and I'll try to stay online. Bye-bye.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, so I'm going to start off here. We're going to talk about recruitment today and the changes that we're going through. And we've all been through so many changes. I'm sitting in my dining room, and I've taken over my dining room table as my office. People are working from a wide variety of arenas. But going back to the statistics, I mean, last March, we all started to have to deal with the pandemic. As of today, there are over 33 million cases of COVID, over 1 million deaths. And your region, Southeast Asia, is the second highest region that's dealing with it. So I'm sure you guys are all on a variety of plans and dealing with it. So we'll get into that. But the community's come together and done some great things. EARCOS obviously is doing some great things to bring your schools together. One of the other ones I have to really point out is AAIE and what they are doing to help schools to navigate these tough waters. So highly recommend connecting with AAIE and seeing what they're. But you know, some of the schools are open. And some of the schools are moving ahead tentatively, some of them successfully, some of them not. I mean, even in my local situation, our schools opened up, but we had a huge spike this past week. So the local schools here in New Jersey have had to shut down. I'm sure you guys are dealing with all of this. AIE is spotlighting how some of the schools are handling this, and schools are working together. Like the American School of Warsaw has come up with a whole plan, a white paper on stop, protect, and react. So again, the resources are out there. Some are doing hybrids, some are doing online, but the pandemic is at the forefront of everybody's mind right now. And that leads into the unknowns, and the unknowns are the lack of predictability. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think, and schools are reeling. I think one of the biggest areas that we're seeing is the enrollment. Some of the schools the enrollment is down and they're struggling with the budgets. But on the flip side, it needs to be said, there are some schools out there that are over enrolled. Because they've managed the situation well. But with the lower budgets, always something hard to go through. Where does that leave recruitment? That means changes are in place. As we know, all of like the ISS events are going to be online events. We're all going virtual fairs. The face-to-face events are canceled. I believe Search is doing the same thing. But what's happening is people are using this technology to connect and find ways to navigate and connect. Zoom, Google Meet, FaceTime are all being used. Not everybody's favorite, we realize that, but there are some benefits. And we're going to talk about databases and how important and the changes in fairs, but they're off. But these are many things that the schools are having to navigate. One of the things that's also spiking is visa issues. Again, I think in your region, some schools have had no problem bringing teachers in, although getting the teachers there, and the travel restrictions have been an issue. But there are also some countries that are closing their doors. And so schools are having to re-examine their hiring practices and looking at in-country candidates. How do you find candidates that are already in country? And so that really kind of leads us to technology and where this is all going to go. It's becoming a more important part of our life, our students' life, our family's life. And so with that, I'm going to throw this over to Alex.
Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to answer the question, how is technology changing the recruitment, the way that recruitment is being handled? Now, one of the ways we work at Teacher Horizons is we speak to the teachers that we work with. So my team of advisors probably speak to about 40 or 50 teachers every week. And since COVID started, we've spoken to hundreds of teachers, and we also have spoken to a lot of schools. I thought I'd give that context because I wanted to share some of the insights that our team have seen about the trends in recruitment. Obviously, the face-to-face recruitment is becoming, well, pretty much impossible. Recruitment fairs are very unlikely to return in the near future. Some people are asking whether they'll return at all. I think looking at the trends in business, for example, a businessman who would quite often go to New York from London for a business meeting or to Hong Kong, it looks increasingly like that's not going to continue afterwards from what analysts are saying. And I think it's interesting to think about, obviously, the costs, the time that's involved, the technology that has enabled meetings like this to happen, and whether that's going to continue for recruitment fairs as well in the future. I think it's important to see this as an opportunity as well as a challenge. As I said, it removes the cost, a lot of the cost, and that allows you as recruiters to save money and to save time. And obviously it's good for the environment, not traveling all over the world. But it also removes the physical constraints of recruitment, which means that it's possible to access bigger pools of teachers, new pools of teachers, like Teach First that I mentioned before, or other interesting pools of teachers that you might not have come across, but also to involve more of your team in recruitment. So you might have people in offices in different parts of the school, on different campuses, or who are currently traveling, that can be part of an interview that's remote. I think virtual fairs are definitely things that are going to continue as well. I think that they won't necessarily carry on in the way that they have. I'm sure you've all been involved in some virtual fairs in recent months. I think that there's a possibility for much more niche fairs over the coming months and maybe years as well. So a fair particularly for your school, or a fair that's dedicated to your country. So there might be a fair for schools in India with teachers who are interested in moving to India, or potentially even subject-specific talks, fairs. So you could have a carousel of physics teachers, and different schools could meet physics teachers over a much shorter period, for example, an hour, and have almost a speed dating type chance to meet teachers, see if they're interested, and then follow up with them afterwards. So I think virtual fairs are changing things, and online opportunities to meet people are definitely going to be a thing of the future. Another question is does this mean it's the sort of end of the CV? More and more teachers are setting up online profiles, and I think the possibility of having a kind of teaching portfolio online is a more and more appealing thing for teachers that we work with, where they can post videos of them teaching, they can have endorsements for their colleagues, they can highlight the connections they've made, they can have their confidential references and things that you've seen already, but also sort of how they assess their students' work, photos of them teaching, trips, etc. And I think you as recruiters have the ability to search and filter candidate profiles and to connect with them directly, but also to filter on very specific things. So at the moment, you might be in Singapore looking for teachers who are currently in Singapore. And I think those are the kind of features that are going to be really useful. Or looking for teachers who can teach online, and you can filter on that. So I think that's something that is likely to continue to happen in the future. Finally, I think in terms of tools, I think, well, we've all got Zoom fatigue, but Zoom's not going to go away. There are more and more schools using video application systems where you can choose your own questions and candidates can answer in a sort of first stage of application system on video. There are better tracking systems where you can move candidates across a tracking system, notify them of what stage they're at. And it always sort of reminds me of more of a pizza delivery type system where everyone knows at what stage it's all going on. And I think those systems are going to become bigger things over the coming months. And I think the advantages, again, those will lower the cost. And I think advertising, I've spoken to a lot of schools that I visited who are frustrated by the costs of advertising. I think technology also offers the chance for the costs of advertising to go down significantly. And then social media is another thing that is more and more teachers are using forums on social media to advertise jobs and to talk about positions. So I think in conclusion, tech is changing the way recruitment's being done, but I think it's a real opportunity for you as schools to save time and money as well. Thank you.
And to back up what Alex is saying about online events, it's always, I think it's been sort of an awkward scenario for as it has developed, as things have come about. But this past week, I was just a participant in another online event for a group out there called HubSpot. It was called Inbound. The technology that's being developed to go with these online events is actually quite impressive. Mm-hmm. What is being pulled together, and it's going to be a transition. Things are going to change and get better, but it is actually quite stunning what some of these online events can do. So I don't want to build them up too much, especially when we're doing a lot. I don't want to get that expectations up here, but it is quite impressive what is happening with technology.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So,
yeah, over to you, Judy.
Thank you. I thought I saw a question, but no.
Well, let me just jump in here really quick. We were going to do an interactive, and then we're going to do some polling questions because we really want to get some information, and we want you guys to share some information as well. So if I can get Dana or Anissa to throw up some of the polling questions, if they can be popped up, and really this is just sort of informative, so it's a way of bringing together and getting insight from you. Number one, do you believe that recruiting will ever return to the way it has been done, face to face and going in that direction? So if I can get you guys to just give me a quick answer and hit submit, once that's done, we'll have an idea of what's the tone out there. What are we thinking that's going the idea out there? So do we have any results over there, Dana, if to come in? Are people still voting? We'll go in that direction.
I think Nisa can see the results. I can't see them right at the moment.
Okay. Are we going to share them now or share them at the end?
Wait, as soon as we turn off polling, we'll share them immediately.
Thank
you. So it looks like we've got 58 of 65. That looks about right. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now and share the results.
So 52% say they don't believe that we're going to go back to the way it was, but 17% say yes, and 31% of us in this community right now are not sure what's going to be happening in the future for recruitment. I think we're all in there with you. I think we're all going forward. We have a second poll question that I'd like to ask. And that second poll question, if we can pop that back up on the screen, this year, and I think this will really affect, and I think this, your recruitment this year, has your school enrollment decreased, stayed the same, or increased? Because that, of course, it's informative. How are you guys doing? This is going to affect your needs for bringing in teachers. So if I can get you to do a quick answer on that.
We have about 75% return so far, so just a few more people.
Thank you, Dana. And with that, wow, okay. So 43% of the schools in your region have had a decrease in enrollment, 31% have stayed the same, and 26% have increased enrollment in their schools. So, and that's informative. And the next question is a little bit on the repetitive side, but let's just go ahead and see, because I think this talks a little bit about turnover, but poll number 3 we'll do the last one for right now. Looking at your upcoming vacancies for this year, Do you think you'll have less than in previous years, the same, or more? And I think that's more along the lines of sort of the turnover in the teachers that you have there. Are people going to stay? Again, the enrollment question does play into that, but what's your reaction on that one?
We've got about 70% voting so far, so we just need a few more people.
Cool.
We'll give you about 5 more seconds.
Cool. Thank you. And on this one, it's going to be, it looks like most of the schools are looking at less upcoming vacancies. 48% are saying that they're going to think the hiring is going to be going down. The same is going to be schools that think they're going to have about the same in previous years, 37%. And 15% think that they're going to have more of a recruiting need. So I just think that was informative for you guys, and go from there. So Julie, I'll throw it over to you to go next on how can schools adapt and change.
Okay, so for some schools, this, some of these ideas that we're going to talk about right now might not be a change, but you may have some things you can add to the conversation or share with others. One of the pieces of this that we want to talk about is, you know, the role of interviewing and selecting candidates for your school. All of the research is starting to look at really involving community members and in a team manner, as opposed to maybe the principal and the assistant principal interviewing, or you know, some model like that. And as Alex said, technology really lends itself to this, because we don't all have to be in the same place, and in many cases for the next few months we can't be in the same place, interviewing inside a school together probably. So having the opportunity to have a diverse team, and when I say diverse, what we want to think about in this regard is ages, genders, roles in the school, length of tenure in the school, nationalities represented in your school, and trying to come up with some groups of people who would really be interested as a professional development activity, which I'm a big fan of. I always involve teams at school, and sometimes that didn't work as well in the days when it was trickier to connect with each other. And actually, one of my favorite stories is one of the best teachers I ever hired. It occurred because I was at the search fair in Cambridge many years ago, and I looked at somebody's references and said to Mark Ulfers, who you all know, "Mark, you know, what's the deal with her? She sounds great." And he said, "She is great. She's an 11 on a 10, Julie. And by the time you talk to half of the teachers at ASL and get them involved in deciding she's the candidate you want, she'll have 6 offers." I kind of went out in the hall and hired her in about the next 20 minutes because of what he said. But now it would be much different, because we could have done that even before we, you know, had a fair, whether it was virtual or in person. But what I used to find is that, and I still believe thoroughly in, is that if you're really interviewing strong teachers, they're going to be sharing incredible ideas about what they do in their classrooms, how they build community, you know, interesting pedagogy that they've designed, assessments that they do. And I often found members of an interviewing team frantically scribbling notes and saying to each other, "Oh, that's a great idea. We should have thought of that." So I think it's something that often people don't think about as an opportunity in terms of setting up teams. Most research that I've been reading talks about consistent teams, though. If you're hiring for high school science, what is the team that's going to talk to all of those candidates, the ones that you bring in virtually, the 4 or 5 finalists, for instance, so that there's some comparison and there's some continuity and consistency in terms of looking at how you view those candidates. But I do think it's really a process worth looking at. And I'd really encourage schools that haven't done that in the past to look at how they're doing it differently and what they could involve people with. Obviously, it does allow you to move faster when we can all be virtual. We're talking to 5 people maybe in a 2-hour span, for example, and starting to really winnow down the group that we want to continue to look at, as opposed to trying to do things that are more in person or where we're all trying to get together at a busy school. I think one thing that's quite interesting from my point of view too is the critical nature of communication. We're going to talk about this a little more beyond this one point here, but I think it's so important that there's a system at every school for letting candidates know where they stand in the process, getting back to them. I read today, actually, just looking at some things that a survey that Career Builder did found that 42% of workers said they would never seek employment with the company again if they were displeased with the way their application was handled. And another 22% said that that would encourage them to tell others not to work at that particular place. And another survey they did even more recently, 75%, and this is happening in our schools still, I have to say, 75% of people said they didn't hear back from a position about a position they'd applied for. And I would just really emphasize this point. It makes such a difference to candidates, even if it's a form letter that's well written, but that says, we're glad you wanted to be at our school. We're going to take the next 3 weeks to look at information about candidates and to have interviews. We'll get back to you. Or if you even said, if you don't hear from us in 3 weeks, you can assume that you have not been short or long listed for this position. Even that is an answer. But it's so difficult when candidates apply into what feels like an abyss. So I just hope we can all do a better job with that communication. And I think last but not least, having offer letters that are thorough and accurate as the end point in the interview process. I have a candidate right now actually in your region who's having a second interview soon, and she's already been sent an offer letter, you know, in general terms, but with all the specifics, you know, and here's our faculty handbook, and here are a couple other things before she's even gotten to the second interview. It's not okay for an offer letter to say something like, as per the faculty handbook. No, people need to see, you know, details when they're thinking about accepting a position. And I know that we all feel that we want people to make a firm decision. Well, I think that really needs to be based on accurate information. So if you haven't reviewed your offer letters recently, you know, to make sure that they're thorough and accurate, I would really urge you to do that, because it's going to come quickly now, not at a fair. It's going to come at the end of a Zoom interview or whatever model you use. And people are going to want to see that information quite quickly. So I hope that all of us who offer people different things, and the recruiting agencies do too, of course, we give feedback. I guess I just want to underscore the point of let's all make sure that it's timely and accurate. And I'll pull it over to you. Go ahead, Laura.
And that's where I'm going to follow up with what you're saying, Julie, and it's along the lines of the communication aspect, but it's also talking about building your brand. We all know how important it is to have a strong reputation. That's a given. But we're part of a smaller, more condensed community now. We always have been, but I think it's getting tighter, and people talk, full stop. We know that there are arenas out there where messages can be shared. There's social media as well as other areas. And unfortunately, the negative messages tend to get more airtime, though the positive ones do come through. So it's so important to keep this idea of communication trail in your mind as you're going through recruitment. I mean, there's got to be a trail. There's got to be a system in place, and that will help build your brand. Brand integrity is important. It's how consumers, i.e. your teachers, your students, perceive your brand or your school and the services that you offer. You know, and while every customer experience may not meet the experience that you want, when your school loses that brand integrity, its value, your value is diminished. So you need to look at this through all of the lenses, to include the teacher lenses. So build your schools, number one, build your school's online presence and continue to build it up and grow. Manage the reputation. Look at your brand integrity, live by your brand values, and build it up. Transparency and openness is so key because increasingly the information is available online. Whatever you do does get shared in one form or another. So keeping that idea there is so important. But going back to what Julie was saying earlier, and this is talking about communication, look at the communication system you have in place and ensure that it's built out. Ensure that you have a process. If a candidate applies, to get back to them. Do you have a system in place with you and your admin team? Do you have dates and timelines? Somehow or another, because as Julie mentioned, and I can vouch for that as well, you know, many teachers will feel like they go into this abyss and they don't hear back from you, and that is going to come back around and reflect on your brand, as I'm talking about originally. But look at the system you have in place. Talk to your team, make sure that you're all on the you're doing the same thing. Get back to a candidate within a week. Give them an idea of when they're going to get some kind of response. Let them know where they stand instead of them applying and going off, you know, not knowing what's happening. And get back to candidates as soon as possible. It really is important. Even if it's just a thank you, we'll be in touch, but set up procedures, set up dates for recruitment, let candidates know, and look at it from the perspective of the journey of the candidate via your hiring system. You sit in their seats and build it and try to build a positive experience. You know, you may not hire them now, but you might really you might have a really good connection, but maybe not a position for them. So think about it for even future years. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Alex, I think, is going to touch on recruitment changing from, you know, the way it used to be, which we all have agreed that it's not going to go back that way, but, you know, building those connections for maybe not just right now, but for future times. But it's, you know, we hear from a lot of candidates at ISS, you know, we're not sure where we stand. So I just would like you guys to just sort of think about it in that way. And again, it really is positive for you guys. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to
Alex.
Me.
Yeah.
I'm just going to sort of add a bit to what Laura has been saying, also to what Julie's been saying about the importance of online presence and brand as well. So I think we all know that, you know, recruitment is now a year-round event. It's not something that's done and dusted, but it's something that's ongoing. So really, you need to snap up great teachers when they come. And a lot of our schools are already working on their recruitment for August 2021. I think one of the really important things we've seen about brand and conveying your brand is the importance of values and the emotional connection you can have with teachers. And I think this is something that's probably going to become stronger over in the future. So if you can convey your purpose as a school, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you there? This is something that teachers will connect with and buy into and will make you stand out ahead of your competitors. And then I think in terms of the online marketing side of things, get that message out there. Don't wait for teachers to come to you. I think, I mean, the question is how to get it out there. And I think the social media is something, especially with international school teachers, they tend to be people who are very online anyway, but they read blogs. You can get your teachers to write blogs. They read forums. They are on a range of different platforms. They do write reviews. And I know that we're not fans of reviews in general, but reviews can be positive and constructive as well. And I think you can encourage that from your colleagues. And it's really essentially a soft marketing of your brand And as Laura said, it's about being open and transparent, because they'll be able to recognize that very easily. I think search engine optimization is also worth talking to your colleagues on your web team about as well, because a lot of teachers search things like international jobs in Asia. And if you can appear in there, or the best schools in Asia, then, you know, it might be a blog, it might be something where you've identified keywords that you want to appear in, then your school will appear higher up and you'll get much more applicants for your positions. Another thing is community. I think online networks are generally going to become a bigger thing. Networking has always been important for recruitment. Face-to-face networking, as senior leaders, I'm sure you've realized that as you get more senior in your role and your career, networks are more and more important. But that is, again, switching online. So everything from LinkedIn to other social media channels are important. And then we touched on talent pools. I think talent pools are brilliant for schools if you're looking to play the long game, which I think is important. And essentially they're tools that allow teachers to express interest in your school. So there might be a teaching couple with, you know, one's a biology IB teacher and their partner is a primary school teacher, and they might express interest in your school, but you have nothing for them at that moment in time. But the advantage of it, instead of sort of getting a CV and putting it in some file somewhere, is that you or your successor can then go into your talent pool on your profile somewhere and look at teachers who have expressed interest in the past and get in touch with them, even if it's in a year or 2 or 3. And it might be that at that point you can do a search and filter for that exact match and then get in touch with the teachers, and they might well be interested in the school still. So it allows you to build a relationship with teachers in an online context over time or gradually, and to keep in touch with them. So really my point is that online presence is essential for international schools, and it will help you attract the best teachers. Anything to add, Julie or Laura?
No, I think that was very well said. I think that talent pool idea is huge, and I think finding a way to really keep track of those people. I've even seen that really helpful at Search, for example, where people wrote to me and I said, "Ooh, you know, you really need another year of experience and, you know, certification to be a really, you know, valid candidate at a good school." And, you know, I kept track, and sure enough, 2 or 3 years later, I've had about 5 people come back to me this fall saying, "I've got the certification," and, you know, they're a whole different level of candidate now. And I think most of us used to do that in our file folder drawer in our office, now a new system, of course. But when I met people at fairs and didn't have a job for them, that's exactly why I had a hot prospect drawer, you know, file folder, and I pulled people out when I needed somebody. And it was amazing how many times that worked out. So I think it's really important to think about that and think about the value of looking at it as a year-round activity.
And I'll back up what Julie is saying. It is a year-round activity. And I think most of the major systems out there allow you to create your own talent pool. So use the systems that you have available to you. But it is a year-round activity. And, you know, while you could meet a great person this year, you might not find the perfect position for them for another 2 years. And on the flip side, like Julie said, maybe somebody's not just ready yet for your school, but keeping an eye on the people, keeping connected is just so important.
There's an interesting question, actually, I'm just seeing. Will Teacher Horizons, ISS, and Search implement these video tools in their platforms? Being able to use a video, to see a video preview of a candidate would be helpful. I think that's a great suggestion, and I think it's coming. I think probably it's something all of us are talking about. And I, in particular, I would just say that in a small way, personally, I've encouraged some people who I think have had a hard time getting interviews because, to be frank, their name sounds like they might not be an English speaker of enough of a level to like teach high school English, for example. And I suggested to several people this summer, make a good video of yourself and put it in that place where it's right on your search profile, and actually it worked for 2 out of the 3 people. And I think part of it was they needed to present themselves. You know, yes, they were from a country that, you know, might not have, someone might not have assumed would be the caliber of English that someone could teach high school English at a high level. But actually, this particular person that I'm thinking about at the moment, you know, went to an Ivy League college in the United States, you know, from Croatia. And I think sometimes we overlook those people. And I think this idea is a really powerful one.
And I agree with that, Julie. I'm laughing, and I'm doing a little bit of a plug for ISS, but we actually had that in our old system called Interview Stream, and it wasn't readily used. But I think that's a valid question, and I do think, again, technology is changing how we're doing all these things. So that's a great suggestion and a good comment. Conversations are being had around that. So.
Laura and Julie and Alex, just a quick heads up. So we have, we're running a little bit short on time, and I know you wanted to have more Q&A towards the end. So I just wanted to let you know as we move into the last couple slides, okay?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So Julie, I'm gonna throw this over to you.
Yeah, I'm just reading this one question that's there because, so we've really talked about a couple of these boxes quite thoroughly, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. I think the reputation piece, the only thing that comes up for me is if you feel that you've had some negative feedback about your school that's come back to you in some way or other, have you thought about doing some activity with people who've been at your school for a while? You know, what would they say about your school? You know, getting some honest feedback, either a listening circle sort of thing where someone else runs it, so there's no issue with who's the, you know, who's paying attention, frankly, but, or some other model where you can really hear what are people saying about your school. You know, if I asked you to talk to 2 new candidates, 2 prospective candidates, you know, what would you be telling them about us? I think that can really be a very positive way to look at that. And, you know, Laura already mentioned this, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna reach for my lamp because it's getting dark here because of the smoke. Laura mentioned this about the grapevine and, you know, that the international school world, although it's certainly grown by leaps and bounds in the last few years, is actually a fairly small community of people who know each other in various ways. And so that grapevine is huge. And I guess this idea of what would people say about your school, I'd just like to read this to you quickly. It'll take me about a minute. This is about a school in your region, a newer school that I did not know at all. And I have 2 candidates who accepted a position there after something else fell through, rather unfortunately, last spring. And I just wrote to them about a week ago and I said, are you still stuck in Hong Kong and what's going on here? Here's the answer I got. Dear Julie, we received our invitation letters and we were in the visa office immediately. We crossed the border an hour and a half after receiving our visas. Our school has been incredibly helpful along the way. At one point, our salaries were going to be cut due to us being late. However, these were reinstated to the full 100% in order to support us in our efforts to cross the border as soon as possible. Since we've landed in quarantine, HR has booked us a service flat. A car is scheduled to pick us up when we're released Friday evening, and they've even been ordering us food from outside the quarantine hotel. The principal and head of primary have been doing everything possible to make this transition less stressful, and we're incredibly grateful for their efforts. As we see more and more of the staff, it looks as if we're going to be surrounded by a very diverse and qualified pool of educators. We already love our teams. We're ecstatic to be starting in person right after the Golden Week holiday. You know, that to me is what I'd want someone to be saying about a school where I was in charge. And I think many schools do things like this. Sometimes it doesn't get the publicity it should. But I think really trying to think about what do you want people saying about your school. And I just wanted to share that specific example that just happened this week. I thought it was incredibly impressive. I'm going to move on from this slide because I think we're done with this topic, but we have 2 more polls we'd like to ask before we go on to the next slide, Dana. So in your opinion, has the supply of teachers been affected by the pandemic? Can you see that at all in terms of the applications you're getting? yes, no, too early to tell.
You have about 66% and it's slowly getting up. We'll give you about 5 more minutes.
I think you mean seconds, right?
Seconds, yes. And we'll end now. There you go.
Too early to tell. Okay. So we have 18% saying yes, a small percentage saying no, it hasn't been affected, and a lot of people saying too early to tell. I can only speak from Search Associates' point of view, and actually mostly my own office, but I'm in the red group too. There are a lot of people reactivating, people who, you know, are ready to move on, or people who went back to the States for a couple of years, but it still seems just too early to tell what the pool is actually going to look like. And the next question. How do you expect to hire this year? Face-to-face, online and face-to-face, online only, or some other method?
We'll give you about 5 more seconds. Final polls come in. There's a race in between two. It's quite tight. And here we go.
So face-to-face, almost nobody. Interesting, huh? Online and face-to-face, 44%, online only 54%, and other. Wonder what the other is. I'm kind of curious. Yeah, I think that's what we would say too. I think the face-to-face is probably going to come up more in cities where people can get to easily or might be traveling through, if we ever get to travel, of course, there's a big if. But face-to-face is probably going to be more in-country people, isn't it, for obvious reasons. And maybe face-to-face at 10 feet apart.
And to follow up on that, Julie, like Jason from UWC in Thailand said, you know, what are we expecting with the turnover? Do we expect more or less? Like from our view, from our perspective, his question was curious whether ISS Search or Teacher Horizons are expecting more or less or about the same turnover than the people on this call expected. And honestly, I'm kind of with the poll that came up. I think it's an unknown as to what the turnover is actually going to be like. I know that there's a lot of teachers that are saying to me, I'm hunkering down. I'm going to wait this out. I will also say, though, we are getting a lot of candidates reactivating their files. Now, some of them have been people who have lost their positions or they couldn't get back for visa reasons. And our online events are booming. We're up over 700 candidates for our October event. So I don't know. The crystal ball's not working on my side. But again, I think a lot of teachers what I'm hearing is a lot of teachers are going to hang on to what they have and then wait it out a year to see how this all moves ahead.
Yeah, our experience is very similar as well. We've had a lot of teachers that have had to hold off moving last school year, and they are now going to take up positions this year. And a lot of teachers have been stuck for visa reasons, either leaving a country or entering a country, but we're planning to leave, and I think they will be moving this year. So I think there could be a lot more movement, especially now that international travel is looking more likely to continue, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I do think it's a hard time for people who are inexperienced at this, you know, to think about going. And I've tried to, well, I guess, you know, I'm older, I can be the mother or the grandmother or whatever you want to call me. But, you know, I think some people who ask extremely naive questions, I'm thinking, really? Like, okay, so you're stuck, you know, all of us know we've had people stuck since Chinese New Year in countries they plan to go on a 10-day vacation with their swimming suit. and still aren't back in China or wherever in some cases. Can an inexperienced person really navigate those very, turbulent waters? So when there's been a doubt, I've been encouraging some people, just stay put for a year. Like Laura said, think about this after you see what's happening next summer. But everybody's different, of course. People have surprised me. I think we're going to move on to diversity, Dana. Yeah. We're not going to spend very much time on this at all. And obviously, there are all different ways we can think about diversity. But, thinking about, does your school have a diversity plan or statement or, a desire to make sure that, we're really recruiting across a range of candidates? I think most of us who have spent a significant amount of time in international schools would say that the richness of the faculty when they are a diverse group of people is what so many kids talk about 20, 30, 40 years later, remembering people that they knew in middle school and high school, or even in elementary school in many cases. So if that's something that's, on your radar screen, I guess I'd say, my encouragement would be to stick with that and really be clear that that's what you're looking for. And I think thinking about the composition of faculty and staff, we've talked about the interview panels, but again, looking across the spectrum at age, gender, experiences in life and in teaching, and people who are second career teachers, thinking about people from other nationalities who, might be the first or second person in your school from that particular country. The richness that can bring, I think, cannot be overstated. And I think it makes a better school for everybody, whether you're the International School of Ouagadougou or the American School of Warsaw. It really does make a difference. And I think the leadership team piece is big too. I think we're talking about this, that certainly there are more women in leadership roles now. There are many more schools being led by women, leadership teams that are heavily women, bringing along younger people, which I think is something that happens, through the PTC and other organizations similar to the PTC, really looking at, again, a range of ages and experiences and not feeling like everyone has to have 8 years of teaching experience in order to apply to be an assistant principal, or, whatever regulations or qualifications are listed sometimes. So I would just encourage you to really think about the non-traditional candidate. I know that there's a lot of research on this, and I've attended some interesting sessions at NAIS in the last several years, the National Association of Independent Schools in the US, their People of Color Conference, and talking about how, it's really hard for non-traditional candidates to see that lengthy list of qualifications and still apply. Often some of them just say, oh, that's not me, I can't do that. So anyway, we can just keep broadening that and thinking about the diversity of people in our schools, I think will really make a big difference. The other thing I'd say is I'm always encouraging, and I'm sure Laura and Alex do this as well, before people accept a job, make it very possible and in fact welcoming and easy for a candidate to talk to several teachers at your school. What's it like to be a 50-year-old woman at this school, single? What's it like to be a 28-year-old, man with 2 young children and a wife that doesn't, isn't going to be teaching right now? I think sometimes schools make it really difficult for candidates to ask for that opportunity. And the good schools, in my opinion, come to, in our case this year, a virtual fair or the recruiting process generally with a list of people that they've already talked to at the school. Would you be willing to be in touch with new candidates in the math department or whatever, and have it all ready to go so that it's very easy for the candidate to follow through on that opportunity. I think, Laura, you were going to weigh in on this a little bit too, so go ahead.
No, and I agree. And I think the role of diversity is important. I think that there's a lot of movement around this topic, and there's a lot happening. And it kind of goes back to something Alex referred to earlier about building your network. There are some great networks out there, the Diversity Collaborative that has I think over 600 members with the meetings that they have going on. ALOC is another one. So there's a lot of groups out there that you as a recruiting team could tap into to find out if you're, to try to build your networks in a variety of areas or directions. So, and then Alex, I think you were going to talk about the next one on,
Laura, did you want us to run the poll or no?
Let's just go ahead and go on to the last one. We're running out of time, so we'll just go and let Alex just go to the future of recruitment.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to speak briefly about the future of recruitment. It's a tough one, especially at the moment. I think the key question is about the supply and demand of teachers in schools. I think we're all aware that over the last 10 or so years, the number of schools, particularly in Asia, actually has been increasing rapidly and has almost doubled, which has meant the pressure or the demand for teachers has increased, which has changed the dynamic a little bit between teachers and students, or teachers and schools. And I think teachers have been increasingly in the driving seat when it comes to recruitment. But I think COVID is changing that in many ways. There's likely to be a recession, and that will affect the number of international schools. Some schools are already closing, some might close, which means that might mean there are more teachers around, but at the same time, I think there are trends with recession. Typically, people move into teaching, so there might be more teachers around anyway. But then will teachers be looking to move internationally? And how does, if people aren't moving back to the usual travel plans or travel situations, is that something that's going to continue? And will they be as keen to move internationally as they have been in the past? Another big shift I think we're likely to see is a move towards hybrid schools. I think particularly for shortage subjects. So if you imagine a higher level maths IB teacher, for example, it might be increasingly likely that they could be based in a place like Bangkok, teaching part-time in a school there, but also teaching online in a school in Beijing and doing evening classes for a school in Dubai. And that means that in those schools where they're teaching remotely, there's probably going to have to be another teacher, possibly a local in-class support teacher, or perhaps a local maths graduate or maths graduate from overseas, who's not necessarily a trained teacher, which means that there's going to be likely to be a two-tiered system, and with local teachers co-teaching with remote teachers as well. So it's something to think about, and something that we think is likely, particularly with shortage subjects. Screening and vetting has been increasingly important. Obviously, safer recruitment's been a big thing recently. Fairer recruitment and what we were just talking about in terms of equality is going to become more and more important as well. It's always been important, but more and more something to be very aware of as recruiters. And then I think there will be more and more systems and tools to support that, which I think are worth looking into. Another thing I mentioned before is the soft values and the skills and the emotional connection with teachers. It's not simply about subject knowledge, but more and more about how you can connect with teachers and how you can have that values fit with teachers who are interested in teaching in your schools. I think softer skills like adaptability are really, really important. I think COVID has again highlighted that, because I'm sure you had situations with some teachers who responded very differently to other teachers in terms of flexibility and adaptability. And I think those kinds of skills are going to become increasingly important. Personality and competencies, anything from sort of Myers-Briggs type tests to how you can make assessments on those things will become more important as well. So we've talked a bit about virtual fairs, and I think they will be part of the future. But I think assessment days for looking at those softer skills are also quite likely to become bigger things in the future. while I was working for Teach First, I was actually a recruiter for Teach First for a while. We used to run assessment days, which were full days looking at competencies for teachers. And it was quite interesting. We had sort of group assessments, and we put teachers or prospective teachers in scenarios in a sort of classroom or staff room type scenario, and almost sort of game plan a real situation. So it might be, how do we deal with COVID as teachers, or how do we communicate it with parents? How do we do an assembly for students? And as recruiters, we observe that situation and look at how they interacted with each other in a real situation. And I think that that would be a hugely valuable addition to the international school sector, where it's not simply an interview where we ask them about their maths teaching history, but something that is much more real and much more tangible, and is much more of a fit for your school. But that's the future. It's very difficult to tell. I think the final thing to say is that virtual reality is really just around the corner as well, and that's going to totally disrupt everything to do with recruitment and probably teaching and learning as well. So yeah, I guess in conclusion, it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but these are some trends that are likely to continue. Anything to add, Julie and Laura?
Well, and along those lines, as going to questions and comments, and I see there is a question about how do you plan for the virtual fairs? How do you make teams work? After not to ask from Vietnam, how in terms of preparing our recruiting teams to successfully participate and hire in virtual fairs, some general guidelines would be very helpful. So we're into questions and comments, and I'll jump in on that one because we've been doing virtual events. The one caveat I'm going to say here is every virtual event is going to be very different. It's I don't know how it's being set up. So and coming from our perspective, we've been doing them for a long time, but even this year we've done a pretty massive change. Our online events used to be like 4 or 5 intensive hours of bringing everybody together, and it was a learning curve for us and a learning curve for the schools involved. And it was everybody in a room and switching computers and talking to people because we were trying to navigate this new system. But now our online events, and I think Julie, your online events are going to be a couple days long. And so your question is a really good one. And I think that what probably should happen is I should reach out to the schools and let them know how our events, what's the best way to manage the team. But because we're doing a 2 or 3 day event and it's not as intense, it's more along the lines of connecting and coming to an online platform. So there are no real guidelines per se, just making sure that your recruiters get in, connect with the teachers. But that's a really good question. And I could go off on that for the next 15 minutes, but I'm not going to. But I think that's a valid one for me to address with those that are coming to our, I appreciate the heads up on that one.
We will too. I'm not sure what's going out. It's just being finalized, I think. I know we've done a lot of, well, more than tweaks, I don't know, major changes based on some pretty successful things that happened last spring. But that is a really good idea. And I think some of us really heard about comments from teachers. I tried to make myself available for the 2 days or the half a day or whatever, and no school ever checked in, or a school never, got back to me, or, all those kinds of things. So, I mean, that's a two-way street too. And, there needs to be good communication from candidates back to schools. And with the time changes, time differences we're talking about, it's very challenging in some ways. But our virtual fairs now, when I send an invitation to a candidate, when they accept it, they are agreeing to be available for most of 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
And a lot of how these events are going to be run is dependent on the platform that has been put in place. So again, I think that's a really great question, but one that needs to be directed to the events that you're actually going to. And I think all of us have gone away from the sort of intensive 4 or 5 hours. We're doing it for a couple of days because we really want to, going back to that communication piece, give time for people to connect and know what's going on and ensure that both parties get answers to questions that have been posed. So.
Yeah.
Can I just chip in as well? I think that in answer to the question about how to prepare for it, I think it's also about planning for what kind of virtual fair you want to do. So I mentioned before that there are lots of different options, and increasingly they might become much more niche. So it might be something specific for your school or something for just the subject area. And instead of necessarily giving up, 3 days of your senior leadership time, it might be that you want to do a more niche thing that is just very much more specific for your needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're learning with you guys. I think that's a big part of what Alex is saying. So we're here to work with you as we proceed. So any other questions? I see.
Are we all sending reminders to candidates on things to think about in virtual interviews? At times, the level of the computer background lighting, sound, background noise, etc. I'm sure that's coming from Search. I think I'm going to be doing a webinar or something about that. But I just wanted to make sure we did mention that we are sending out the presentation, if anybody wants that, and also a handout that we developed working together over the last couple of weeks. Some interview questions that we think are quite good, some tips and ideas about the whole recruiting process. So keep an eye out for that in the next day or two, and that'll be coming your way, and hope it's helpful. Feel free to share it.
All right. And with that, I'm going to throw it probably back over to Ed to say, because we are now 15 minutes over time, throw it over to Ed to say thank you very much. And I'm going to say I sincerely have enjoyed working with Alex and Julie putting this together, and we appreciate you giving us your time. So Ed, I will toss it back your way.
All right, well, thank you. A wonderful presentation and great questions, a lot to think about. I really think this is a great way to spend my evening, and hope for all of you that you share that sentiment. Please know, Laura and Alex and Julie, how much we appreciate what you've done. This has been a real service to the schools. It's a very strange world right now. And, I'll tell you, I was one of the people who said we're going to go back to recruitment the way it was just because I'm stubborn. And I know it's never going to go back to the way it was, but I hope that once in a while people can get together and talk face to face. But it's a challenge, and this is, of course, a perpetual challenge every year. What to do about recruitment, and it was kind of good to talk about something that's sort of an old problem as opposed to a new one. So thank you for taking us through that. I wish you all a wonderful. I think for most of you, it's a day coming up. Have a wonderful morning and afternoon, and for the three of you who did so much to prepare for this. I watched in the background all the dialogue that was going on. I mean, you really worked to make this happen, and I'm grateful for that. We have a lot of great schools in the region and wonderful people, and I know that they've really benefited from what you've shared today.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was really fun.
No, good. And I just want to let all the participants who were here let their colleagues in their schools know that this will be on the EARCOS website. In a few days' time, I think we'll be recording, so people can at least come in and take a look and hear what was talked about. But I thank you all very, very much. Wonderful.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for arranging it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Alex.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.